My brother and I were excited as we prepared for a night of fishing at a remote river nestled near a quiet forest. It had become our little tradition to escape the busyness of town and find peace by the water, just the two of us, under the stars. There were always rumors swirling around town, stories of strange sightings near the river, whispers of eerie happenings, but we never paid them much mind. We were more focused on catching fish than on ghost stories. So, with our gear packed and the night ahead of us, we set off, ready to enjoy what we thought would be another peaceful evening by the river. We had just settled into a comfortable rhythm, the quiet sounds of the forest and the gentle lapping of the water creating the perfect backdrop for our night of fishing. But then, out of nowhere, we heard the sound of something splashing into the water. At first, we thought it might have been a fish, but when we looked up, we saw a young boy standing at the edge of the river, casually tossing stones into the water. It caught us off guard. What was a kid doing out here at this time of night? Annoyed by the disruption, we called out to him, telling him to stop. I asked him where he was from and why he was out here so late. The boy didn't seem bothered by our questions. He just shrugged and said he lived on the other side of the river, near a restaurant, and that he liked to come here to play at night. His vague response and nonchalant attitude didn't sit right with me, but I didn't think much of it at the time. We just wanted to get back to fishing. We tried to get back into the rhythm of fishing, but it was impossible to ignore the boy. He kept tossing stones into the water, each splash grating on our nerves more than the last. The tranquility of the night was shattered, replaced by an odd tension that I couldn't quite shake. Frustrated, we shouted at him to knock it off and go home. This time, he didn't argue or linger. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he had appeared. But even after he was gone, the uneasy feeling remained. It was like the air had grown colder, the night more silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Neither of us said anything, but I could tell my brother felt it too. Something about that boy, about the way he showed up and vanished, had unsettled us both. Out of nowhere, a thick fog began to creep over the river, swallowing the moonlight and plunging us into an eerie gloom. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and a cold dread settled deep in my gut. I could barely see my own hand in front of me, let alone the water. As we strained our eyes through the mist, something caught my attention, a shape floating slowly down the river. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what it was. A small child's coffin, drifting silently with the current. We just stood there, paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just debris, but it wasn't. It was a coffin, and deep down, I knew it. Desperately clinging to our sanity, we tried to resume fishing, but the tension was unbearable. And then, as if the night wasn't terrifying enough, another coffin emerged from the fog, following the first. That's when the true terror set in, overwhelming us with the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. The darkness around us felt alive, watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, and that whatever was with us had no intention of letting us leave. Unscathed. The sight of those coffins, floating silently in the persistent fog, was more than we could bear. I could feel the cold grip of terror squeezing my chest, and I knew we had to leave, now. Without a word, we scrambled to gather our things, hands shaking, hearts pounding in our ears. Every second felt like an eternity, the thick fog pressing in on us, as if the darkness itself was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. We didn't look back as we fled, our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. But no matter how fast we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right behind us, hidden in the shadows, chasing us away. It was as if the night itself was alive, driving us out of that cursed place. By the time we reached the safety of our car, we were drenched in cold sweat, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We didn't speak a word to each other as we sped away, leaving that nightmare of a river far behind. From that night on, we made a silent pact, never to return, never to speak of what we saw. But the memories of that night stayed with us, haunting our dreams, a constant reminder that some things are better left unexplored. I remember the excitement vividly. My cousin had just returned from a trip, and he brought back a songbook full of chord diagrams from our favorite bands. We've been itching to learn these songs, especially with the school event coming up where we wanted to perform. As soon as he showed me the book, we made plans to meet at his house that night to start practicing. My mom, however, wasn't thrilled about the idea. She warned me not to stay out too late, especially since it was during Lent, a time she believed could attract bad things if you weren't careful. I brushed it off, thinking it was just another one of those superstitions that didn't really mean anything. I was too eager to start playing the guitar and hanging out with my cousin to worry about old wives' tales. That evening, I headed over to his place. He lived in a more secluded part of town, near an area filled with trees and a small stream. The neighborhood was quiet, with only a few houses scattered around. As I walked, the anticipation of the night ahead filled me with excitement. Little did I know, this night would be one I would never forget. This part sets the stage for the story by emphasizing the excitement of the reunion and the initial dismissal of any supernatural warnings. When I arrived at my cousin's house, we wasted no time diving into the songbook. We set up in his room, guitars in hand, and started practicing, laughing and joking as we fumbled through the chords. The excitement of learning our favorite songs kept us going late into the night. But just as we were getting into the groove, his grandma called out from the kitchen, "Don't stay up too late, boys. It's Lent, and it's not wise to be out at this hour. You never know what you might attract." We exchanged glances and snickered, not taking her seriously. To us, it was just another one of those old superstitions, something we didn't need to worry about. We were too focused on the music, too caught up in our excitement to care about what she said. We brushed it off and kept playing. As the hours ticked by, though, the mood started to shift. The night grew darker, and the air in the room felt heavier. I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Eventually, it got late enough that I knew I had to head home. I packed up my things, thanked my cousin, and stepped out into the cool night air, ready to make the walk back. Little did I know, the warnings we'd ignored were about to take on a terrifying reality. This part introduces the grandmother's warning and begins to build the tension, hinting at the unsettling events to come. As I started my walk home, the night was eerily quiet, with only the sound of my footsteps on the dirt path. The trees on either side of the road seemed to loom closer, their shadows stretching long and dark under the faint moonlight. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my gut, telling myself it was just the lateness of the hour getting to me. About halfway through my journey, I noticed movement up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a stray dog or maybe a wild animal from the nearby forest. But as I got closer, I saw it was a black sow, large and shaggy, with a single piglet by her side. They were just there, rooting around near the edge of the road. It was odd, but not particularly frightening. Just a mother pig and her baby out foraging. I kept walking, trying not to disturb them, but something about the scene made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was the way the pig's eyes seemed to follow me, glinting unnaturally in the dark. Or maybe it was the fact that I had never seen a pig around here before. I quickened my pace, wanting to get past them as quickly as possible. But as I rounded the next corner, my heart skipped a beat. There, just a little ahead on the same path, was the same black sow. This time, though, she had 3 piglets with her, all of them huddled close to her legs. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could she have gotten here so fast? And with more piglets? I felt a chill run down my spine as she lifted her head, staring at me with those same unnerving eyes. The realization hit me, something wasn't right. Without thinking, I started to walk faster, almost jogging, my eyes darting around nervously. But as I passed her, the sow turned and began to follow me, her pace quickening to match mine. My discomfort turned into fear as I glanced back, only to see her getting closer, her steps heavy and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to rationalize what was happening, but deep down, I knew this was no ordinary animal. This part heightens the tension by introducing the unnerving encounter with the black sow, hinting at something unnatural and foreboding. I tried to keep my cool, convincing myself that my imagination was running wild, but the feeling of dread only deepened. As I hurried down the path, the black sow kept pace with me, disappearing into the brush on one side of the road only to reappear on the other, each time with more piglets in tow. But it wasn't just the increasing number of piglets that unnerved me. She was growing larger with every reappearance. What once was a normal-sized pig now loomed unnaturally large, her body swelling and darkening as if absorbing the shadows around her. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to keep moving, my steps quickening into a near run. I didn't dare look back at first, but when I finally did, my breath caught in my throat. The sow was no longer just a pig. She was something else entirely. Her shape began to twist and elongate in ways that defied nature. Her body rose up on hind legs, the front hooves morphing into grotesque, clawed hands. The creature's fur bristled, and her face contorted into something half animal, half human, with eyes that burned with a malevolent intelligence. She let out a series of low, guttural rumbles, a mix of pig-like grunts and something far more sinister, followed by a terrifying, ear-piercing scream that echoed through the trees. I stood frozen in place, paralyzed by the sheer horror of what I was witnessing. The creature, no, this monster, towered over me now, easily as tall as any man but far more powerful. Her massive frame blocked out the faint light from the moon, casting me in an even darker shadow. I knew in that instant that I had to run, or I wouldn't survive the night. With a sudden jolt of adrenaline, I turned and bolted down the path, my heart pounding in my ears. The creature followed, her heavy footsteps thundering behind me, getting closer and closer with each stride. I could feel her hot breath on my neck, and I pushed myself to run faster than I ever had before, the terror of being caught propelling me forward. Every instinct screamed at me to keep going, to not look back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how fast I ran, she was always just a step behind, ready to grab me and drag me into the darkness. This part intensifies the terror as the narrator experiences the full horror of the creature's transformation and the desperate need to escape, heightening the suspense and fear. I sprinted through the darkness, my legs burning with effort, as the sound of heavy footsteps closed in behind me. I could hear the creature's raspy breath, her guttural growls growing louder as she gained on me. The sight of my house in the distance was a small glimmer of hope, but it felt impossibly far away. I pushed myself harder, praying that I'd make it before she caught me. As I neared the house, I felt the creature's presence closing in. With a final burst of speed, I reached the gate, my fingers fumbling with the keys in a panic. But there was no time. She was right behind me. In a blind frenzy, I threw myself over the gate, scraping my hands and knees on the rough wood as I tumbled into the yard. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and ran toward the door. My shouts echoed through the night, loud and desperate, as I pounded on the door, hoping someone inside would hear me. Behind me, I could feel her watching, and I couldn't resist the urge to glance back. There she was, standing at the gate, her massive form illuminated by the dim streetlight, her eyes locked onto mine, filled with a malevolent intelligence that sent a shiver down my spine. For a moment, we stood frozen, staring at each other across the yard, and then, as if deciding I wasn't worth the trouble, she turned and melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the night. I collapsed against the door, trembling with relief and terror. It wasn't until the door swung open and my parents pulled me inside that I realized I was still screaming. They tried to calm me down, but I couldn't stop shaking. The image of that monstrous figure at the gate burned into my mind. That night changed me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't even step outside without feeling her eyes on me, watching from the darkness. Even now, the memory haunts me, as vivid as the night it happened. I don't know what I saw, what that creature was, but I know one thing for sure. I never want to see it again. This final part captures the intense fear and lasting trauma that the narrator experiences after his terrifying encounter, emphasizing the psychological impact of the event.